Chapter 1868 Drucker. Deng Shintong held open a piece of light, so that everyone could temporarily see the world in front of them clearly, but this light was so thick that it was as dark as spread ink. It was as if something was compressing the light and preventing it from spreading out. Fatty Su muttered, "Master Deng, can't you turn on the light?" Deng Shintong glanced at him and said with some dissatisfaction, "You think it's because I don't want to?" He raised his head and narrowed his eyes slightly, with a hint of caution and fear towards unknown things in his eyes. "Something terrible has appeared, and my power has been suppressed by it." Everyone stared at the sky as if they were facing a great enemy. Dark clouds covered everything in the world. It was as dark as an abyss, seeming to swallow up even the light. There was a whistling sound of wind in my ears, as if hundreds of millions of wild beasts were roaring in the dark clouds. Liang Yu couldn't help but put his right hand on the hilt of the knife, his eyes sharp, ready to face the possible threat at any time. Throughout the Chernobyl wasteland, no one's nerves were not tense. Ever since Fremon's changed, there have been too many things in this world that their common sense cannot understand. And what can they do in the face of all this? I can only face the unknown darkness like I am now, holding the weapons tightly in my hands, waiting for the unknown to come like a helpless child. Behind the light gate, Tianyu Palace was disappearing. At this moment, Zhang Yi felt relaxed all over, and the three of them seemed to have received a refreshing baptism. The 14.8 billion spiritual essences of the Ihan tribe were released from the Tianyu Palace, and they will eventually return to the sky. Immersed in such a vast spiritual ocean, Zhang Yi felt as if she had returned to her mother's womb, comfortable and warm. Many broken memories emerged in his mind. They were what the Ihan people had experienced. Like a breeze blowing by, it quickly disappeared without leaving any trace in his mind. This was how Zhang Yi felt when he first joined Taichung. It's like a dream. When you wake up, you don't remember anything, but the feeling still exists vaguely. The Ihan people are a race created by the Creator and possess the highest spirituality. The mass of these 14.8 billion spiritual essences exceeds the total mass of the entire universe's spiritual essences. When they explode like this, Zhang Yi and the other two who are in the center bear their power. At this moment, Zhang Yi finally understood why the manager looked indifferent when he asked for a reward. After all, compared to such a grand baptism, all material reward seems so insignificant. Yang Xinxin closed her eyes, and her body had become almost transparent. After endless spiritual baptism, the physical body becomes dispensable, and at this time she already belongs to a creature of a higher dimension. Ichigo felt the changes in himself and shouted excitedly, "Ah, this is the feeling. It's so wonderful. I can feel myself transforming. Perhaps this is the opportunity for me to break away from the 5th level life form and transform into a 6th level superdimensional life form." Suddenly, he burst into tears. Wrong, all wrong. The path that the Songyuan clan has taken has been doomed to failure from the beginning. The Crusader told him the nature of the material world. The visible is powerless, and the invisible is powerful. Spirit is the true meaning of the universe. Therefore, they abandoned the inner improvement of their own spirituality and pursued the development of mechanical civilization, thus embarking on an evil path that deviated from the Great Way. No wonder they eventually met their doom. At this time, Zhang Yi was immersed in the ocean of spiritual matter. There was no change in his body. Only his essence, the spirit in his body, was growing vigorously. He understood what the spirit of sacrifice and the source of God were. When the spiritual essence returns to the etheric world, it will be separated from the energy remaining in the material world. This part of energy will be absorbed by other intelligent creatures, causing them to completely transform. The source of God is the impurities removed from this spiritual essence. This substance contains all that intelligent creatures gain in their lifetime. Therefore, only other intelligent creatures can absorb and evolve it. But for other races and intelligent creatures, this is a deadly poison. Therefore, the source of God can only allow people to break through the restrictions of gene locks. The spirit of sacrifice is the purest spiritual power. It is harmless to absorb it, but it can make one's spirit body grow continuously. Zhang Yi wandered in this torrent, and the four knights stood far away to the side, guarding everything they inherited from the Yihan clan. The Knight of the Crown of Thorns looked at Yang Xinxin, Yichigel, and Zhang Yi, and his voice suddenly carried an ancient and distant emotion. How far can those who inherit our legacy go? We all failed to complete the task. Will they be able to find the answer? The knight in the mad dog helmet sighed softly. Difficult, difficult, difficult. If this world is all fiction and illusion, and the meaning of our existence is arranged by the supreme will, then our existence is all false. So how can we break through? At this point, his eyes revealed a confused look, and then he asked himself the question that the administrator had asked during the initial trial. What is the meaning of life? No one could give him an answer. They are tired of repeating the same thing over and over again, so they decide to leave and leave the problems to future generations. However, at this moment, the administrator's voice suddenly sounded above Tianyu Palace. Warning! The spiritual space is under a force attack and is about to be breached. Hearing this voice, the four knights' eyes suddenly became fierce. Is it finally here? They didn't show any expression, as if they had expected this moment to come. Crack. Above the white sky, a black crack suddenly appeared in the sky. The crack grew bigger and bigger, and then it shattered with a crack. The sky of the Tianyu Palace collapsed. The Tianyu Palace barrier, which was built with advanced intelligent technology and existed for billions of years, was completely destroyed at this moment. Behind the palace of bright heaven is an indescribable darkness. The noise made Zhang Yi open his eyes and look over. At this moment, he saw a scene that he would never forget in his life. Above the sky, the barrier of Tianyu Palace was like an eggshell, and a hole was broken from the outer world by a huge force. Behind the child, an indescribable, but hideous and terrifying face appeared. What kind of face is that? It was so big that it was hard to imagine, and almost nothing could be seen on the face that was as dark as an abyss. There was only one blood-red vertical pupil located in the center of the forehead, which suddenly opened. Behind him was a dark abyss, which was turning behind his head like a wheel of fate. A large amount of spiritual essence unconsciously escaped along the damaged part. Suddenly, a pitch-black arm popped out from the hole, and then stretched out. A large amount of spiritual essence was forcibly grabbed into his palm, as if attracted by something. Zhang Yi stared at this scene in amazement. When he grabbed it, he seemed to hear countless spiritual beings wailing. But this may be his illusion, because if he chooses to return, he will leave the material world too much and his spiritual essence will lose its self-thinking. With one grab of the dark monster, at least hundreds of thousands of spiritual essences were grasped in his palm. Then Zhang Yi saw a white streak on his dark face. He opened his mouth wide, and every tooth was as sharp as a knife. He raised his head, stuffed all the spiritual essence into his mouth, and then enjoyed swallowing it into his stomach. Zhang Yi was completely stunned by this scene. Although he was at a very long distance, he could feel the size and terror of the monster. He seemed to come from another world, and wanted to completely destroy the entire Tianyu Palace. And Zhang Yi felt deeply the insignificance of his life. In front of him, all living beings seemed to be reduced to bait. He realized what it was. That is the Creator's failed work. Even the Creator's repeated punishments from heaven have not been able to wipe out the horrible creatures, the Druckers. Boom! Zhang Yi heard the sound of thunder in his ears, as if some powerful will was descending from the dark sky. An instant later, a huge beam of light descended from the deepest part of the universe and then slammed heavily on the back of the dark god Drucker. Boom! The light of the universe is vast, and its power makes Zhang Yi tremble with fear from a long distance. He, Yitujier, and Yang Xinxin looked up at this scene, completely in a daze. The energy impact of that dimension has exceeded the limits of their imagination. They knew that it was the Creator Kagago who took action. But the Dark Drucker blocked the Creator's attack. The huge dark vortex behind him was spinning rapidly, as if it could swallow up everything in the material world. Ling once said to Zhang Yi, "Those guys can devour everything in the material world." But Zhang Yi stared at the dark Drucker in a daze. That dark power and that huge black hole vortex made him feel extremely familiar. That kind of power seemed to be of the same substance as his power in the void. As for the power of the void, Zhang Yi had no idea where it came from. It's just that when his spatial ability is improved to a certain level, he can draw this power from the plane where the different dimension is located. At this moment, he saw God Drucker fighting against the might of heaven. The huge dark vortex looked like a huge black sphere, hanging high behind God Drucker, swallowing up the light of the universe that the Creator had brought down. Zhang Yi's body was shaking with excitement. That was what the power of the void should look like. Powerful and dark, it can devour everything in the world. A vast ocean of spiritual essence washed over Zhang Yi's body, and at this moment, a paragraph of words suddenly emerged in his mind. Hiding from the will of heaven, avoiding karma, all kinds of shackles entrap my true self. Following the will of heaven and accepting the cause and effect, today I know that I am myself. Once you realize the truth and see your true self, why should you fear the old shackles? The shackles of the past are just dreams, without form or self. This paragraph of characters comes from the original text of Xinxue by the sage Wang Shou. Ever since obtaining the scripture, Zhang Yi has always regarded it as a treasure. It's a pity that his words are limited, and his realm has not been reached. Even with Yang Xinxin's help in interpreting and understanding the literal meaning, he is unable to experience it with his heart. Until this moment, after 14.8 billion spiritual essences of the Yihan race washed over his body and cleansed himself, and after watching the scene of Drucker the god fighting against the might of the Creator, he suddenly realized something in his heart. It's clear and understandable, but it can help to enhance one's understanding of oneself and time and space. When the knight saw the coming of the giant Druck, there was no fear in his eyes. They can allow Drucker to continue to devour the spiritual essence and return to the ultimate will of the Ether God. Kagago also needs the observation results of these 14.8 billion spiritual essences on the material world over billions of years. So, they decided to take action. The mobile phone terminal created by the Yihan tribe represents their most powerful combat system, with the power to fight against Drucker. At this time, the spiritual baptism has come to an end. The light began to dissipate, and the entire Tianyu Palace was shining with light, a light that came from the spirit body. Just outside the Tianyu Palace, at this moment, the world outside was also illuminated brightly. No matter where on the planet, there is always a hazy and magnificent light lingering, as if saying final farewell to the world. In the capital of Atisha, Pope Alexander X excitedly knelt in Theseus Square and prayed with tears in his eyes. This is the will of God. Everything will eventually return to heaven. Only by believing in God can you be liberated. On a small island in the Pacific Ocean, Montesquieu, the president of the Hitomi organization, sat in a wheelchair, looking out the window with deep eyes. At this time, it should be dark here, but the world outside is shrouded in a hazy and sacred white light. A strange emotion emerged in his cloudy eyes. The catastrophe is coming. He looked at the sky and said leisurely. On the wasteland of the original Chernobyl site, those people closest to the space node were amazed at the miracle before their eyes. At this moment, Deng Shintong suddenly frowned. He touched his forehead and suddenly felt that some changes seemed to have taken place in his body. It seemed that his eyes could see more clearly, and his body seemed lighter. With the release of 14.8 billion spiritual essences, the soul's essence returns to the ether, and the huge amount of matter contained in the spirituality will be completely released in the entire material world. The impact of this change on the entire world is 10 times greater than the ice age that came 3 years ago. Many people who have survived to this day suddenly found that they had undergone obvious changes on this day. In many corners of the world, some people who were deemed to have no special talents suddenly began to awaken their special talents. The powerful person who had awakened earlier actually got a second awakening for the first time, and his strength was greatly improved. Miracle! People exclaimed excitedly. In Tianyu Palace, Zhang Yi closed his eyes, feeling the subtle changes he had just realized. A big sword appeared in the Crusader's hand. He waved his hand and a huge gate of light appeared in front of him. You guys should get out of here. We will stop him, and then we will return to the ether. He spoke to the three people in a tone without any emotion. Zhang Yi slowly opened his eyes, and suddenly he felt a strong murderous intent coming from a distance. The look in Ichigo's eyes, the murderous intent in those eyes was undisguised. After obtaining the legacy of the Ihan tribe, Ichigo now felt that he was getting closer and closer to a higher dimensional life. He has the opportunity to save the Tsangru people from extinction and rebuild their glory. But before him, there were two people who, like him, had been baptized by the ocean of spiritual essence. He is not able to allow such things to exist in this world. But now, nothing matters anymore. As soon as he leaves here, he will kill these two people first. No matter how talented they were, when they reached the next level, the gap in strength between them and him could not be made up. Zhang Yi knew very well what Ichigo was thinking, and he also thought so. At this moment, Ling no longer looks the same as before. She walked forward step by step, and an ice-blue glow gradually appeared on her body, forming a kind of armor similar to dragon scales on her body. The thing wrapped in white cloth that she had been holding in her arms turned out to be a huge long sword. Zhang Yi never thought about the knife because it was so big, it looked like a stick. If this kind of weapon is hung around the waist, it is probably impossible to pull it out. But the next moment, Ling showed Zhang Yi its correct usage. She raised the huge sword high above her head with both hands and then pulled it out with a clang. That posture seemed to support a huge mountain. The moment the scabbard was opened, an incomparably powerful radiance shot up into the sky and headed straight for the Druk giant god like an eternal rainbow light. With just one cut, a huge gash appeared on Drucker's chest, so deep that you can see the bone. Zhang Yi looked at Ling's back. At this moment, her body was slowly dissipating, and her spirit was also slowly disappearing. If decides to return to the ether, perhaps she can fight against the Druk Titan alone. After all, this is a powerful race favored by the Creator. Ling. Zhang Yi called out her name as a human. Ling didn't look back. She just said, "Let's go. It's not safe here. We are about to return to the ether, and we can only guarantee to send you away." Zhang Yi knew that the time was short, so he quickly said, "Would you please do me one last favor?" Only then did Ling turn around and look at Zhang Yi. She took one last look at the human she was interested in. Ichigo took one last look at the sky. The battle there was beyond his level to participate in. A look of desire emerged in his eyes. Now that he has obtained the legacy of the Ihan tribe, his greatest wish is to let the Tsangru tribe rise again, and use the legacy of the Ihan tribe to dominate the world, and finally achieve eternal survival. He couldn't understand the troubles of the Ihan people. After all, their civilization was not that long, and they had never achieved true immortality. They were defective products, and even he had almost decayed over the long years. Ichigo turned around and flew quickly towards the light gate. However, just as he approached the light gate, his pupils suddenly shrank and his body stopped in midair at an extremely fast speed. In front of the light gate, a huge secondary gate blocked the exit. Ichigo could clearly feel the fluctuations in space. Zhang Yi and Yang Xinxin appeared nearby, and Ichigo turned around and looked at them. "Want to leave here? Do you think I will give you this chance?" Zhang Yi's voice was very cold, like a biting cold wind blowing past Ichigo's ears. Ichigo narrowed his eyes and looked at the two ants in front of him. He admitted that these two guys had great potential, and if they were given enough time, they would grow to an amazing level. But now, these two people can't threaten him at all. At this time, you're still thinking about escaping from this dangerous place. Do you still want to fight with me? Ichigo looked around the battlefield above the sky. A group of Ihan knights were besieging the giant Druk. The fluctuations of energy were isolated by them, but it was still thrilling. Zhang Yi shook his head, his tone indifferent. You will become a greater threat to me if you leave here. In the eyes of the giant Drucker, people like Zhang Yi and those so-called strong people in the outside world are not qualified to be his food. But once Yichigel returns to the world, he will definitely cause a storm, and who knows how many people will die because of him. The peaceful world that Zhang Yi wanted will reappear. What's more, Zhang Yi also knew that Ichigel would definitely kill him first. Therefore, he had to kill them here first while their strength was pulled to the same level. Huh. Ichigel laughed contemptuously. Zhang Yi said calmly, I forgot to tell you. This world is collapsing, and its rules are slowly being lifted. I asked Ling to lift the rule of resurrecting in the world after death. So, if you die here, you're really dead. The Ihan tribe, who have mastered the technology of immortality, can allow the soul to exist apart from the body and then create a new body at any time. The true spirit cannot be destroyed and will only return to the ether. Therefore, the way to resurrect after death is to let the true soul return to the ether, then use technology to repair the physical body, and then inject it into the spiritual body. Yichigel's eyes became even colder. He laughed, his body shaking violently. Ha 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 ha. He covered his face and laughed wildly. You think you can kill me? How about using your previous fortress tactics? Yichigel pointed the sword in his hand at Zhang Yi. Excuse me, that tactic is useless here. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in his hand suddenly stabbed at the secondary door that blocked the exit.
Space shock.
He wanted to break through this secret door. As long as he could get out, he would win. Swish. Zhang Yi took a step forward and stood in front of Yichigel. Yichigel's sword did not stop at all. His sword was faster than before. After experiencing the baptism of the ocean of spiritual essence, he also underwent a transformation. The red sword, with its indestructible edge, stabbed directly at Zhang Yi. This sword can shake open space. Even if Zhang Yi uses Senluo Wanxiang to block it, he may not be able to block it. Unless he avoids it, but he knows that Zhang Yi will avoid it. Zhang Yi was faced with a dilemma.